So, hi, thanks for joining me today, Raúl. I'm Carolyn Blume. I am a professor of English, language, literature, culture, and didactics at the Heidelberg University of Education. And we are in a shared project together. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself first, though?
Hi, my name is Raúl García. I am currently a PhD student at TU Dortmund and wissenschaftlicher Mitarbeiter. I am a lecturer here at the university, and I am researching research literacy and teacher identity.
Those are really interesting topics. And we're here today together because we're also in a project together called Reality, Research Literacy of Teachers. And that obviously goes right to the heart of what you're looking at in your PhD studies. In addition to the different approaches that you're using to examine teachers' research literacies, you've also started looking at the issue of duoethnography as part of teachers' research identities or potential for looking at their research identities. Can you start by telling us what duoethnography is?
Yes, I'm not an expert. I can only talk about what I've learned and my experience doing ethnographies. First, the reason I'm doing a ethnography is because after doing my PhD research, collecting the data, working on the writing, analyzing everything, I realized that I needed to do that everything I learned about research literacy development and teacher identity, I should probably look at those things in myself. So I was started wondering how I could do that, how I could tell the story of my own research literacy development and how that led into my interest in the topic as a research field. So I bumped into duoethnographies, and I found the approach so interesting because duoethnographies, one way to put it for people out there who may not be familiar with the concept, is kind of a validation of how professional conversations can turn into professional growth. Like informal professional conversations can turn into or can become professional growth. So duoethnographies are basically conversations that colleagues or people who have some sort of a professional relationship or relationship whatsoever. These people have these conversations, they interrogate each other, and it's basically a meaning-making site for people with a particular interest on themselves, on how they've grown, how they've developed, or how they see one particular concept.
So it's really kind of a realization of that whole idea of socio-constructivist knowledge construction or knowledge development, that in conversation with others, you develop new insights or new ways of understanding yourself or other things around you.
Yeah, socio-constructivism is at the core of the
Hmm.
ethnographies, I think. And yes, my personal experience, and now that you've brought this up, my personal experience is that I've always had these conversations about professional growth and about teaching and about learning and about language with friends, colleagues, and those conversations have always been so meaningful in terms of they always are places where I can reflect and where I can get a lot of input for reflection. So this is what I'm doing. I'm currently working on a duoethnography. I'm working with a colleague, former student, and I must say, also a friend, who is also a language teacher educator, just like me. And we've talked about the past 10 years since she was my student at a teacher education program back in Colombia. About I taught her research methods, and I was a very, very novice teacher educator at the time, challenged and shocked by the idea of teaching research.
We were all
But
novice educators at one time,
yes,
right?
But so after that, that was a very positive experience for the both of us, with very particular, aspects that took place or events. So we've started out from there, and we've had a number of conversations where we have discussed kind of our career trajectories after that initial class, how those trajectories have been shaped by our interest in research, and how our identity has both influenced and been influenced by research literacy development. And we have framed that conversation around the idea of differences between the global north, studying, working, teaching in the global north and researching, and studying, working, teaching, and researching in Colombia. So we're kind of comparing how the research and educational ecosystems have intersected with our research literacy and our teacher identity.
So I mean, on the one hand, this sounds like it is very meaningful to you. And in fact, it harkens back to one of the first conversations we ever had, which was, I think, maybe 4 years ago, when you came to me and you said, well, what I'm really interested in is how did I develop this identity? Where does it come from? And how do other people develop their identities as teachers? And this is really what you've wanted to look at from the beginning. And you've been focusing over the last three years on the identity development of your teacher education students. And you're right, it makes perfect logical, theoretical, conceptual, and epistemological sense to now focus on yourself. But what does it look like when you say you're having these conversations with this colleague, friend, former student? Walk me through the steps of how I would do a duoethnography if I wanted to do one.
All right. Experts say that duoethnographies are a very good method for novice researchers, and I agree. I can tell you the specific ways or the specific methodology that we're using, but there are, of course, other possibilities and things you can add to those ideas. We had 5 different conversations about our research literacy development and career trajectories from the perspective of the dynamic systems model of role identity, kind of a meta theoretical framework for identity, for teacher identity, written by Kaplan and Garner. So basically what we did, we took that framework, we used elements from that framework, and we organized each conversation about some of the elements of that framework. So that's only the starting point, because these ethnographies or duoethnographies, one of the things is that they are more emic in nature. What that means, they're more interested in internal relationships than predetermined variables or realities. So that's the starting point, and then the conversation takes us where the conversation will take us. One of the things that we always try to keep in mind is to be very critical of what the other person is saying, to interrogate that from a theoretical perspective, but also to try to help that person make meaning and make sense. So we have these conversations. They can be 45 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour sometimes. And after that, we transcribe that conversation. We read it individually. And of course, that gives you a different perspective. That helps you notice things that you didn't notice at the spot. And then, based on the reading of that transcript, we wrote a number of questions that we didn't think of when we had the conversation, or things that we just want the other person to expand on because they're interesting to us or because we relate to them in one way or another. So we write these follow-up questions and we answer each other those follow-up questions. And then we move on to the next interview. And then we do the same thing. And we did that 5 times.
You said interview, but it's really more of just a conversation between
it's a
two
conversation. We
colleagues.
just call it the way we call it because I like the term when I saw it in the literature is dialogical interviews.
Okay.
So that's the way I refer to them. But yes, in nature, they are just they are basically conversations. They're a little bit more structured because you have some theoretical framework that you're kind of inhabiting during that
Mm-hmm.
conversation, but it's not too tight.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through that process of having 5 conversations with 5 follow-up questions that each of us wrote and answered.
Mm-hmm.
And then after all of that, we sat down, we analyzed the transcripts or the data individually. We came up with things that we thought we were interesting. We discussed those things. We kind of validated each other's analysis. And then we decided to develop a certain tone and a certain style for our narratives. Um, and we wrote our narrative, our discussion, if you will, and we realized how important, as we saw that we read through the data, we realized how important there were 3 main stages or there have been 3 main stages in our career development for
Mm-hmm.
during the last 10 years, and we decided to kind of adopt that chronological approach, if you will, to discuss the ways our identities have shifted, the ways our research literacy has expanded or shrunk,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the contexts where we are and the control parameters of the systems that where we operate. Um, so it's basically, as I said, a validation of informal professional conversations with a little bit of, with a theoretical framework, yes, with a certain systematicity in the method, things we did repeatedly, but it's a validation of collaborative meaning construction,
Mm-hmm.
and the value of dialogical reflection.
Okay.
When you have these conversations, there's a lot of feedback that you get about your ideas, and then that leads you to reflection, and that leads you to develop a language to talk about certain concepts in your development, in your career, or in your the ideas that you have regarding teaching, regarding learning.
So now you're starting to get to some of the things that I was going to ask you as follow-ups because it sounds like a lot of navel gazing. So it sounds a lot about, a lot like you're looking at yourself and your identity and your trajectory and your development. Why would it be interesting for other people to, first of all, let's say, read your ethnographic journey or duoethnographic journey? What purpose does it serve to have these narratives out there?
I think everybody thinks about these things. They question themselves, they question what they do, they are doubtful, they are determined. And I think it's always a good idea to put a mirror in front of yourself and say,
Mhm.
all right, I've gone through these things. I haven't thought about these things. I haven't done anything about these things. Now I can develop a language to talk about my own development, my own ideas. I can recognize my strengths, my weaknesses. I can understand past events and how those events shifted to the kind of teacher that I am.
Mhm.
Many teachers, the way teachers construct their knowledge is influenced by how they were taught, by what they were taught at university, but mostly by their experiences in the classroom. And sometimes when we don't think about or reflect on those experiences, our identity changes, but we are not aware of why and how it changed.
Mhm.
And we develop teaching habits, teaching practices, but we don't know where those ideas come from. We're not very certain why we teach the way we teach, why we have certain beliefs about how students learn, about how we teach. And it's a very good thing to question our beliefs and how they influence our practices. So
Or
in
how
a
they
way,
don't, oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Well, or I was going to say, or how they don't influence your practices, because we have all this research that tells us teachers do not necessarily do what they say they believe in the classroom. So they
That's
hold
right.
one belief, but they teach differently. And it sounds like this might be a method of kind of thinking about that disconnect and reflecting on it and maybe clarifying either our beliefs or changing our practice or both.
Exactly. There
Mm-hmm.
is a gap between what we say we do and what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And developing that kind of meta awareness
Yeah.
It's very important to understand what we do and therefore to understand how we can do it better and how we talk about these things. Reflection, as you know, reflection in the last decades has become a central part of teacher education and teacher development, and learning about how others reflect and seeing models of how reflect can be done can definitely be helpful for teachers. It's
Yeah.
hard to reflect. It's not, one might think that it's a natural thing to do, but it's not. Some people have a hard time. Some students have a very hard time when they are asked to reflect on what they're learning or what they would like to learn or the kind of goals that they have as teachers or their past experiences with learning.
I'm really glad you said that, because I've said this before in a number of contexts that we know reflection is important, and we try to scaffold and support pre-service teachers, for example, that's my population, in becoming good at reflection. And I've been very frustrated by how hard it is to teach people to reflect. Either they're good at it or they're not good at it. And I've found it very hard to move those people who are not so good at it to the point where they are good at it. And of course, we could talk about what good is, but that might be another conversation. But the idea that there's some kind of critical reflection about what you're doing and why you're doing it and making meaning out of it, some people do it very easily and some people really struggle with it. And now you've inspired me to say, well, let me try this approach, maybe incorporating some elements of ethnography when asking students to
Yes,
reflect.
I have here just I'm just consulting the names. Norris and Sawyer, who are the people who came up with this duoethnographic, they actually use it with students.
Hmm.
And I think that makes a lot of sense because it is the teacher-student relationship makes it hard for some people to open up. That
Hmm.
we know. And so like peer collaborative reflection
Yeah.
may be one pathway towards
Hmm.
kind of fostering or scaffolding that ability to reflect. Some people will not give you that possibility, like it's not going to happen. And we know as educators that sometimes with some students we triumph and with others we fail. It's part of the job, right? But creating those spaces, facilitating, peer reflection, creating different types of scaffolds. In the end, and this is one of the things that I've learned about teaching research with an identity approach, is they end up appreciating the possibility to think about what they're learning and how it might be able to help them or maybe not,
Hmm.
or to kind of question their interest or how they see research and its relationship with teaching. And this is very interesting because this is part of what I've learned about myself doing this duethnography. 10 years ago, when I was teaching research, I thought I was looking into personal, bringing an identity lens, although I didn't have the language to know that at the time. But in reality, I was running away from reflection. As a student myself, 20 years ago, I hated when my teachers asked me to reflect. Like, what's the benefit of it? I remember how uncomfortable I felt when there were those type of activities in class. And that was my mindset when I started teaching. And with time, I realized that was one of the elements that was missing in both my own teaching and in my students' learning. So I've learned, I've kind of become a little bit more, a way more explicit about understanding that about myself in my developing journey, thanks to this duethnography that we just ended with my co-author.
And you mentioned, I'm going to come back to this later. You mentioned Norris and Sawyer as a text that inspired you. In the field of ELT, we know that our colleague Mark Jones and Rob Lowe have really been critical and at the forefront of bringing this method into English as a foreign language teaching and learning. So I do want to give them a shout out there too, because I think Norris and Sawyer are in education more generally in our field. You can look at Rob Lowe's work, Mark Jones, David Gerlach, and I believe Darius Banegas has also done something on
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
right?
There isn't a lot of duoethnographies in our field, in our
There
specific
are.
field of English language teaching. So reading Mark's duethnography and David's and Darius was very inspiring for me,
Hmm.
both in terms of the formatting of how duoethnography looks like, because it's definitely a bold approach that
Hmm.
you know, that doesn't follow traditional conventions of academic writing. So it's
Hmm.
kind of encouraging, but
Yes.
also the critical aspect of it was very clear
Hmm.
in their work. So they were very inspiring, and they kind of gave me the courage. I was thinking, is this good enough? I mean, should I do something like this? I was I was hesitant at first, but
Hmm.
after reading them, I think it gave me kind of a boost to actually conduct this study.
Well, I think you're definitely inspiring me to think about doing one as well in the coming months. But your focus, in addition to identity and role identity and teacher educator identity, you've mentioned this a couple times, is the idea of research literacy. So maybe we could turn to that for a minute. How does research or research literacy, what do you think research literacy means? And how is it related to your duethnography work?
Well, research literacy. It's just I think a way to call people's ability and personally interest in. To me, those two things are equally important.
Hmm.
And when it comes to pre-service teachers, I think interest and attitudes are a little bit more important, perhaps. But it's kind of the combination of ability, knowledge, and skill,
Which is what
competence.
a broad sense of
Yep.
competence. Exactly. Yeah.
um, Teachers have, or
Hmm.
yes, in our case, language teachers have, to use research as a source of knowledge, learning, and ultimately professional development, with everything that that entails: the ability to read academic text, the ability to evaluate academic sources, the ability to design a certain methodology, the ability to talk about, to analyze, the ability to make decisions, like instructional decisions based on the outcomes of those analyses, and the ability to communicate that to colleagues in any kind of venue, informal venues, written venues, spoken venues. So the idea that research can be of help for a
Hmm.
teacher, and the abilities and the attitudes that a teacher has towards, and the openness that a
And
teacher has to use research as that as that.
at the same time, broadening the definition of what constitutes research. So saying looking at yourself in a systematic way through duoethnography is a kind of research.
Yes.
Focusing or reflecting on what happened in a classroom, what went well or didn't go well, experiential practice, action research, any systematic way of kind of looking at yourself or your teaching or your relationships and kind of using that data that emerges
And that
from
is
it.
one of the, as you know, that is one of the main barriers that I have
Hmm.
found in for helping pre-service teachers develop their research literacy, is that their conception of research is too narrow, too
Yeah.
traditional, too positivist, if you will.
Hmm.
So alternative, not I wouldn't say alternative. They're not alternative anymore. Other forms of research
Right.
that involve that do not involve generalizability, representativeness, are not
Hmm.
valid to many
Right.
of our pre-service teachers. So
I
kind
think,
of
yeah,
battling those conceptions is one of the first things that you need to do.
I think Mark said last week using, for example, autoethnography, I think was what he focused on, or duoethnography as one method in the repertoire of research approaches that may be more accessible to classroom teachers by their very nature.
Yes, and even beyond that,
Hmm.
teachers, we are doing, we are observing, analyzing, and making decisions all the time in the classroom.
Hmm.
When and here we could probably move to the concept of ethnography a little bit. When you enter a classroom, there is a number of things that are happening. Some people are getting ready for the class. Some people are checking their phones. Some people are talking to each other. Some people are looking bored as hell. Some people are just waiting eagerly on the first row. All of those things are happening at the same time. And as teachers, when we come in, we see all of those things. We're so
Me
used to
too.
it that we don't think about it too much. But we have this ability to observe. There are so many things happening in a classroom when I give instructions, when I am monitoring group work. There are so many things. And that process of observing, analyzing, decision make, all right, maybe I need to go talk to them because they're distracted or they seem lost. Maybe I need to do this. Maybe I should repeat the explanation. Maybe I should try this instead. I'm gonna drop that activity and I'm gonna do this one. We make those decisions on the spot. And that's those are research skills. We just don't call them that. We're doing ethnographic study, unsystematic ethnographic study all the time in our classrooms. So doing an ethnography or a duoethnography is just taking the time to say, all right, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to give it a little more rigor. I'm going to be a little bit more systematic about this, and I'm going to be a little bit more reflexive about this.
Mm-hmm.
And collecting the data not by an anecdotal observation, but perhaps by keeping a journal, perhaps by taking some notes, perhaps by having a colleague come and observe the classroom and kind of take notes of all those things that happen, and then give myself more time to analyze all that data and make decisions regarding how I do certain things in the classroom or how students do other things in the classroom. So we really live in a classroom culture that we constantly analyze and make decisions based upon the things that happen in that culture. Ethnographies are really kind of formalizing that observation and making it a little bit more systematic. So teachers do have those skills. We sometimes are not aware of how much goes into teaching in terms of observation, analysis, and decision making.
I think, I mean, you did mention, I think, the big hurdle or the big, well, and that is time, right? We need to take the time to have these critical reflections, whether they be with someone else or alone. And of course, saying, well, you have to make the time is very, is not very validating and does not acknowledge the realities that we exist in. But I think you've made it really clear. You've been very persuasive about how meaningful duoethnography could be. And maybe that's where we could close this a little bit. What exactly did you and your colleague concretely kind of come to realize? You said that there's been kind of a chronological progression, maybe focusing a little bit on in terms of your researcher identities. What has that looked like, or what does it look like now? Do you mind sharing some of that?
Wow.
Sorry.
One of the things that I knew, but I've become way more aware, I've understood much more, is that my main engine for research literacy development has been teaching research, which is something that you would probably, that doesn't sound too formal or that it does makes a lot of sense. But in a country like Colombia, the one I come from, many times people are given tasks like teaching duties based
Mm-hmm,
on, like administrative factors
mm-hmm.
or lack of professionals, or like there is a lot of things involved in those decisions. I was the victim and beneficiary of that. I was giving a task I probably wasn't ready for.
Mm-hmm.
So those kind of things, those kind of institutional practices, if you will, questionable sometimes, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
in Colombia, and as some people say, countries in the global south. I hate that expression. I prefer to use the global north. um, Actually become incredible learning opportunities in a very constrained educational research ecosystem. Scholars and people make or take advantage or develop professionally in ways that are very unexpected in the global north. And going through all of that process of teaching research methods for 5 years, having 3 or 4 jobs like it is normal in my country, both at the same time expanded but constrained my research literacy development. So I was a teacher of research methods, what I think is a rather good one, but I didn't have time to do research.
Mm-hmm.
I was only doing the research I was doing with my students. So I became kind of a colleague, facilitator, mentor. And that role, I think, is much more valuable when it comes to research literacy development. I learned from my co-author the importance of making research accessible to students, and how I think it is a good idea to forget about the manuals and the books a little bit and to kind of help students develop their research literacy by reflecting on their own interest. What is it that moves them about teaching? What is it that is challenging for them about teaching or about students? What is it that they really, really want to know? So one of the things I really, really consolidated is how I brought my identity into the research method class and open up spaces for their identity to come in. And that was very productive in terms of research literacy development. Of course, I've learned a lot of things about inhabiting the US during my master's and Germany, like the global north, and
Mm-hmm.
how that expands your research literacy in a way that people who have always lived in the global north couldn't really imagine
Mm-hmm.
what that means to us. But also the combination of knowledges from both Colombia and the global north, how learning to deal with scarcity and lack of resources, how that feeds into your research literacy in ways that are very hard to comprehend in the global north, and the kind of skills that you develop and the kind of appreciation for context sensible research, if you will, or
Mm-hmm.
sensitive research,
Yeah.
for localizing research practices, for validating alternative epistemologies, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So that combination of the two worlds that I've inhabited as a language teacher educator have developed my research literacy in ways that are hard to use sometimes in Germany, but also in ways that make me a little bit more versatile and capable and able to improvise a little bit with and think a little bit outside the box, to use that cliche, when inhabiting places like Germany, the global north, where the practices are so traditional, so set, so strict. It's both an asset and a weakness, I guess.
And there, of course, now you've brought up the whole benefit of international intercultural exchange, whether it be virtual or in person, of having that sharpen your ability to see the context you come from as well as other contexts.
And the
That's
talent that sometimes
yeah.
goes and the potential that goes unrealized in places like Colombia. That this duoethnography gave me the chance to reflect a lot about that, how good some of my colleagues are, but how much their research literacy is limited by the lack of opportunities, the lack of access, because they haven't had the chance to go and study and work in the global north. Um, so that's something I very much appreciate, even more now that I've reflected so much about it.
So in our next conversation, maybe we'll pick up there and talk about ways we can make research more accessible to some of those scholars who haven't had quite the same opportunities, but do have a lot of things they can bring to the table to enrich these conversations.
Absolutely.
Well,
And
thanks a
then,
lot.
well, thank
Yeah.
you. And maybe, yeah, we can, there's a lot of things we can still talk about ethnographies, because I also think that we need to make this accessible for teachers. This is what really matters to us. We need to talk a little bit more. Yeah, there are the time challenges and the logistic challenges, but there's still cases of success and where people have been able to kind of engage in research, even though they have a lot of pressure administratively and work-wise.
So let's think about what some of those things could be for our next conversation.
All right. Thank you
Thanks a
so
lot.
much.
Yeah, it's been great. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Till next time.